Hello everyone, George Garner here. I'm coming to you today with a slightly different episode of South Bend's Own Words. One I think you'll find really compelling. At two public events in October 2022, Doctors Jamie Wagman and Julia Dauer from St. Mary's College presented the results of an oral history collection project they'd been working on. The idea was to collect stories of real people in our community deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 1 million people in the U.S. lost their lives as a result of this historic event. I don't know how many hundreds and thousands of those lives were lost here in South Bend. But I do know that the toll of the loss and the profound change is still being deeply felt by many people here. What Doctors Wagman and Dauer did was help us process that loss and change as told from the voices of people in South Bend who were among those affected. I'm proud not only that the full versions of these oral histories are being preserved in the Civil Rights Heritage Center's archives, but that we get to share audio from their public presentations with you here. I hope that they're as compelling to you as they were to me. Here they are.
Hello, my name is Julia Dauer, and I'm an assistant professor of English at St. Mary's College.
I'm Jamie Wagman, Associate Professor of History and Gender and Women's Studies at St. Mary's College, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to Listening to Pandemic Narratives, selections from COVID-19 oral histories in the South Bend area. This project began with student and faculty work a year ago, during which we located people in South Bend who agreed to be interviewed about their experiences through the pandemic. Then students in a history class last spring met with participants and interviewed them. And then Professor Julia Dauer in English Literature and I continued interviewing participants through the early summer. We donated our collection to the Civil Rights Heritage Center's archive, and then we began listening to the audio files to pull quotes for them for the presentation. As Annette Kuhn writes, the past is gone forever to us, but it is not lost. Oral history work uncovers what was there and what we think of it now. It is both a memory and a reflection on that memory. Together, we interviewed an emergency room nurse, a public high school teacher, a mother of 4, a community organizer, a yogi, a small business owner, an oboist, a priest, the director of the LGBTQ Center, among others. They reflected over loss, isolation, at times gains, and how they are emerging today. Altogether, their narratives make up a generation of people who have collective memory built around the trauma of the pandemic. Their memories differ and coexist with one another, not disputing facts, but rather offering a layered picture of what life was like for residents of South Bend throughout quarantine, vaccination rollout, and beyond. We are most grateful to all who participated. In the Beginning, featuring clips from Jennet Ingle, Mark Albion, Dea Andrews, and Father Brian Ching.
As I saw those initial news reports coming out of China in December and January, it felt like an apocalyptic novel. It felt like Stephen King's The Stand, and you could just sort of see the numbers increasing. There would be a little report in the paper every day about what, or in the online paper that I was reading, every day about how many more people had died of this thing over in China, and it felt both very remote and very ominous. It never occurred to me until the moment it happened that it was going to be something as life-changing as it was for everybody.
My first thought was that it's totally coming to the United States, because we first heard about this cross seas. Even before it spread to Europe, we were fully aware that this was existing in Asia. To me, that just made sense that it was going to come here, because just like any other seasonal flu that happens, that is the natural progression of how it spreads across the world. I'm sure a scientist could better explain that, but that is my understanding, is that that's just what happens. It was that mixed with the thought of what is our government at a federal level going to do about this, and also recognizing that nothing was being done. Those were my feelings on the situation.
I was horrified, actually. Horrified as you watched what was happening in New York City as the epicenter to begin with, and just so admiring for the people who were putting up with this and dealing with it and going to work and all that. But you sort of didn't have a feeling of what it would be like if it came to you. You knew it would, but you weren't viscerally involved in that. You were sort of intellectually and maybe a little emotionally involved in it, but not. It wasn't affecting your life as it was affecting the lives of the people in New York. And then, of course, it started bubbling up places. Indiana was sort of later coming here.
On the business trip, when the whole world sort of came to a grinding halt. So we had a seminarian studying at the seminary in the Archdiocese of Westminster, in London itself. It was spring break here at Notre Dame, so I went to visit him. And literally, I think 2 days into that trip was when we got the call that the university was going to shut down, that all of the study abroad students were being recalled. It was convenient in that I was able to take the seminarian back with me, so he wasn't traveling alone. And a little bit of frequent flyer status helped make that trip home much easier. And that's, I think, the first moment where we really sort of realized that this was going to be a significant and monumental occurrence, kind of like fleeing the UK. I mean, the concern was you're going to get stuck there and the border was going to get shut and all those sorts of things. So trying to exit the United Kingdom in 24 hours was a bit of a feat.
Once the pandemic hit South Bend, featuring clips from Skyler H., Asa Wood, and Ramal Taylor.
My job, I liked working at Starbucks at first. I'd been working there for a couple of months before the pandemic hit, and shortly after, when the pandemic first hit at Starbucks, we closed for a few weeks, and then we opened, that was in March of 2020, and then we reopened mid to late April of 2020, and it was drive-through only. It was very strange. I remember the day we closed to shut down for a few weeks. I took a picture of the lobby, and it was just very startling and eerie to look in the cafe, and no one was there. And I was, saying goodbye to my coworkers, and I wasn't sure when we would reopen, if I needed to look for another job.
Early in March, maybe the first week of March of 2020, we started realizing that we were actually going to have COVID patients at the hospital. So I know at work they asked for volunteers to work on the COVID unit because we were going to set up a COVID unit and be ready for it. And also all surgeries stopped. So of course my floor went suddenly from a very busy surgeries in and out all day to nothing. Everything stopped because we had to preserve all of our PPE. Me and a group of nurses, we all signed up to work in the COVID unit. And this is sort of when we treated it like it was Ebola practically. We really were quite ignorant of how it spread. So we had a whole locked unit at the hospital. Us nurses, we stayed at the hospital. We didn't leave between our shifts. So we slept at the hospital, and we had a really bizarre schedule. We worked 6 hours on, 6 hours off, 6 hours on, 6 hours off. We would do that for 4 days at a time. Because we were trying to limit our exposure to these patients, and also because of some of our respiratory equipment needed to be inspected every 6 hours. So I worked from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. I would try to sleep from 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. Then I'd work 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. and then sleep 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then we would do that for 3 or 4 days at a time, and then we could go home. So we did that a lot, and honestly at the beginning it was kind of boring. We didn't have many patients at first. We had various respiratory illnesses coming in, but we didn't have the testing. So most testing was taking maybe 14 days or so to return. So a lot of these patients, either they were super sick by that point, or they had gotten better and we had discharged them without ever knowing the results. So that was it was a little bizarre doing that. And it was also interesting, there was so much, we always had the TV on, which was probably a mistake, and then there was always the healthcare heroes, people were always cheering outside the hospital, but it seemed very strange because not much was really happening yet. Mm-hmm. But bit by bit, we started getting more patients. Nursing homes got hit first, so we would have, suddenly half my ward would be full of patients all from like a single nursing home as nursing homes got hit. And that was hard because we didn't allow any family members to visit, and a lot of these people were very old. A lot of them died. So we had to, it was just the nurse in the room at the end. Mm-hmm. So we had a lot of that for a long time. So that was kind of upsetting to do. Yeah, it was sort of strange, but then bit by bit we actually ended up getting enough COVID patients that we couldn't contain them to the COVID unit anymore. Mm-hmm. We had to start putting them on other floors. So we sort of broke apart the COVID unit a little bit because we just didn't have room for them anymore. Now they're part of the general hospital population at that point.
When it started, so my childcare, I think, is one of the ones that, we just stay open for anything. We've never taken a snow day. We were at the time, open 5 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. So open early, open late. We really focus on accommodating parents. So I knew in the beginning that I was not going to close like a lot of childcares were. We ended up closing because our first parent got COVID at the beginning of April. It was so much information coming via email from licensing and, requirements, but it was information overload. So it was like having no information. You just didn't really know, gotten, 20 emails in a day telling you, how to adjust your program. But life at the childcare was just trying to adapt to the different changes in regulations, making sure that my staff understood that they would have job security. So really not knowing what that looked like if I did have to close and still have to pay people, how would I financially be able to do that?
Caretaking and Equity, featuring clips from Jennet Ingle, Andre Northern, H.R. Jung, Lauren S., and Skyler H.
Been so hard on my child, for sure. Being suddenly cut off from their social circle. Being forced to pivot to online before they were ready to be independent in that way. Coming out of COVID and going back to, not out of COVID, but going back to school masked and unable to interact with their friends in the way that they had been allowed to do before, right? They had to sit in perfect rows looking forward so that they could eat lunch with their masks off without, actually talking with each other, and that's no way to have lunch. It was really hard. And when we came back to school this past year, and they were in a new school, they were in middle school, and they were still masking, and everyone around them had been disrupted in all the same ways, and it's been awful. It's been awful. I'm seeing that my child's mental health has suffered. I'm hearing from their doctors and from plenty of other parents that this is the case for so many kids in this age range and for so many students everywhere. And it's awful, and I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what to do about it.
I was mostly worried about my children, but as far as myself, and it's kind of the mind state us dads have. I'm just going to strap on my armor and go out there and do what I got to do. And but I was mostly worried to death about them. And the thing is, they didn't get sick because I didn't let them go anywhere. I did all the running. I wiped everything down when I brought it home. It was a rough period in the beginning. I couldn't find a thermometer anywhere. That first 2 weeks, I had to watch them to make sure she didn't pass it on to them. And I remember, once again, I wasn't worried about myself, but I was watching them. There wasn't a thermometer anywhere. I went to 3-4 stores. I ended up finding a baby one somewhere. I was like, this will do. And then I couldn't find batteries, the little batteries for it. It was I remember that particular night, it was very very trying, you know, and, but the thing is, it's like I couldn't unravel because they were watching me. You know, I really did. I wanted to. I was exhausted, you know, but they were like, eyes on Dad. You know, like how he handles it sets a precedent of how they're going to handle it.
It was still very just stressful because we just weren't able to do anything. Mm-hmm. You know, it was, yeah, we did groups via Zoom, but it wasn't quite the same. You know, we saw a huge drop off in youth from pre-pandemic. You know, we have seen probably 4 iterations of youth coming to us. And, you know, we had pre-pandemic and the kids we were seeing there. Then we went to Zoom and we didn't really see those kids anymore. We got a new group of kids. And then we went to Discord and, again, a whole new group of kids. And now we're back to meeting in person. And it feels like a completely different set of kids. You know, it's like, what it tells me is there's a lot of kids out there that we need to be serving. So there's no shortage of them. It's just, you know, it's really kind of fascinating on the sense of depending on the platform and how we interact with kids, we get just different, not only just different individual kids coming to us, but just different mindsets too. You know, it's like we were joking, it's like pre-pandemic, it was karaoke and pizza. That's all they ever wanted to do. And Lauren's like, I suggested karaoke the other night and they all went, no. Like, this is weird. I'm not used to that. This is something you'd love to do. But yeah, you know, it's, you know, some good things have come out of it. You know, being able to do a hybrid model for our groups has been fantastic. You know, we get a lot more people who, for whatever reason, can't necessarily come to the center, whether it's a fear of walking into a place that's called the LGBTQ Center or, you know, travel. They can't. They don't have, you know, a reliable car or they live too far away. You know, yeah, I think about like the women's group. It's great because we've had, particularly there was one woman who had been active with the women's group and then she moved to Vermont. Mm-hmm. And so she hadn't done, but as soon as we started doing Zoom, she got on calls. She goes, this is great. I haven't been able to find a community of women here in Vermont. I really miss this group. It's really great that I'm able to still participate even though I'm not there, you know, and that's really been the wonderful kind of, yeah, there's a lot of things that suck about all this, but there's been some really, you know, just wonderful things, especially, you know, that and parents, you know, we've had parents when we were doing Zoom calls with parents, you know, there wasn't a session where I didn't have somebody outside of South Bend. It was really interesting. At one point I could say, you know, we've had somebody from Kansas, we had parents from Texas, Idaho, California, Florida, New Jersey. We even had one from Toronto, Canada, so we're international now. But you know, it's like these opportunities weren't there pre-pandemic. You know, it kind of forced us into being able to provide these services with more accessibility, and you know, and it's something that even as we come out of this, I'm going to hang on to.
Yeah, the media said a lot of relative, like, this is like exposing inequities in our communities. So, oh yeah, it did. And, I mean, my stance is, so what are we going to do about it? We've always known this, but now you're seeing something happen. And I mean, that's just any civilization where you got marginalized people. If something happens to all of us, it's going to happen to the marginalized people first.
In October of 2020, we drove to Asheville. We stayed at an Airbnb and we went on hikes and we packed all the food with us since we drove and stuff. So we didn't really go to the store or anything like that. But I remember once when we were on a hike, another couple was walking this way and we were walking this way and we had our masks on. I was just like, you know what, I'm going to hike with my mask. I don't know how many people are here. There's like cars and stuff. And Aaron was like, yeah, that's cool too. It's October. It's chilly anyway. Like it feels great to do that. As this couple came walking and they looked like they were retirement age. they both put up their masks and they said, thank you so much. Be careful. It's pretty scary up there. Folks aren't wearing their masks at all. But just that one interaction of somebody pulling up their mask and saying, thank you. Like, it made me feel like every time I see somebody else with a mask, I'm just like, oh, okay, cool. Awesome. Right.
Sociality and Isolation, featuring clips from Father Brian Ching, Stacy Davis, H.R. Jung, Nikki Hammond, and Skyler H.
We became a lot more like hermits. I certainly did. All of those seminarians stayed home, so they did not come back from spring break. Because I had been in Europe, I was in quarantine, like one of the first ones for 14 days right after coming back, in an empty house. And it was, people were kind enough to drop off food and things like that. So we became just a lot more individualized. For us in Holy Cross, so much of our life was communal, going to prayer together and eating together, and all of a sudden we were doing all of those things alone. And especially for those first couple of weeks, you figured we sort of grin and bear it, and we'll get through it, and at some point we'll come back to normal again. I think that was the attitude. I mean, the phrase was like 2 weeks to stop the spread, and we'll all just look down. We'll get through it together, and it became, at some point, it became clear that was not going to be the case.
Socially, everything disappeared. My father's a cancer survivor, so I didn't see him for 3 months. When I finally convinced him he should probably wear a mask, my father was concerned about doing that because he's like, I'm a 60-something-year-old black man. If I put a mask on, they're going to think I'm robbing the place. So when I finally convinced him to put masks on, I left them in my mailbox and waved because I didn't want to make him sick. So that was hard because my father's local. We're literally 14 minutes away, but I didn't think it was safe to see him. Going to the grocery store was like a drama because you're like, don't touch me. We didn't know at the time that for the most part, you can poke people and they'll be okay, right? Everyone's trying to wash their stuff. You couldn't find toilet paper. I know people laugh about this. You couldn't find soup. I couldn't find yeast to make pizza for 8 months. The weirdness of being in the store, not being able to find what you need, and then not being sure. Should I be here?
It's really amplified the isolation. Prior to this, especially with LGBTQ youth, they may have a terrible home life, their parents aren't accepting or whatnot, but at least they could find someplace else to go, whether it's with us or at school with their friends or outside of school with their friends. They had these outlets. They had ways of keeping themselves from being completely isolated. But, with the pandemic, they lose a lot of those, support systems and that network. Everything just closed in. And it's like, yeah, they might have had a great relationship with their family, and that's wonderful. But, they lost that contact at school. They lost that contact coming here. They lost that contact just hanging out with their friends. And, older LGBTQ people who have limited access to get out and do things, it just created more barriers.
3 of our kids don't remember life before pandemic. They literally have no memory of going to school without masks or going into public. We took our girls, my twins are 4, and we went to the mall it may have been their first time ever in a mall that they could, remember. Maybe as babies, I don't know. It was hard to take twins out in public before the pandemic started, so... And they literally were in amazement. When I tell you, this was just their eyes and the comments they made, and they just could not believe there was this thing on earth like a mall where you could go get food and look for earrings, and there was a place to build a they were just and it's hard to fathom because they just, when you think about it, they don't remember a time. That's just unreal to me that I have a 6-year-old and 2 4-year-olds who have no idea of this world, that, this is normal. You go out, you wear your mask, and, there's places that they haven't even seen yet that I take for granted. We went on an escalator one day. We went to Disney on Ice. They had never been on an escalator. My older kids, had done that since they were infants. So it was never a big deal. You guys, we could have not even watched Disney on Ice and just rode the escalator the whole time because it was such amazement to them. So it's that kind of stuff has been very interesting, that there's this whole world that they've never even, and it's little things that we've taken for granted, but they just never have been in the situation to do it.
I also think the pandemic's just a part of life now, because since we didn't do that, we're kind of stuck with it. I'm going to see my friends get sick. I might get sick. Some people are going to die or be disabled. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not really great at the science side of things, but I just don't think COVID's going to go away soon without substantial effort. I also kind of feel like I'm mourning a life I didn't get to have, where I could have spent my early 20s with friends or reconnecting with my parents, since I only seen them, I think, twice briefly over the course of the pandemic, or going back to school because I had to make safe financial decisions instead of pushing for a new career or going back to school or for a master's degree. So I very much feel like I'm kind of stuck where I am until the world changes a little bit more.
Thank you for taking the time to listen with us. We want to extend our thanks again to each of the participants in this project who shared their stories with us and contributed this firsthand experience to the archives at the Civil Rights Heritage Center. The full oral history recorded by each interviewee, 40 minutes to an hour in length, has been donated with a transcript to the CRHC and will be processed and made available for current and future researchers and members of the public. We also extend a special thanks to St. Mary's student Jaden Daher, who assisted us in preparing this presentation. As the pandemic continues to unfold and change around us, we are extraordinarily grateful for these records of the pandemic as it occurred in 2020 and 2021. This faculty-student research project is part of a series supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities and Indiana Humanities as part of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Students from St. Mary's also contributed to a related exhibition, Fighting Fear, Pandemics Past and Present, which is currently on display at the History Museum in South Bend and will remain open until July 2023. As we reflect on the stories we've heard tonight and our own stories of life in a time of COVID-19, we want to recognize the loss and difficulty so many members of our community have experienced. We also want to recognize the resilience of our community and the ways so many have worked to support one another in so many contexts during this extraordinary time. Thanks again for joining us.
South Bend's Own Words was created by Kevin Tidmarsh and me, George Garner. This episode was produced by Jamie Wagman and Julia Dauer from St. Mary's College, along with Donald Brittain from the Ernestine M. Raclin School of the Arts at Indiana University South Bend, and me through the Civil Rights Heritage Center. See what's coming up next for us at crhc.iusb.edu.